Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining what I think will be a really interesting discussion on transforming socio-economic diversity in the creative industries. I'm Nick Harrison, the CEO of the Sutton Trust. For anyone who doesn't know us, we're an independent charity. Our aim is to improve opportunity and social mobility for young people from low-income backgrounds. We do this through our university and career access programs, as well as through our research and advocacy. And look, we aim to improve life chances for individuals, whilst also bringing around system change to influence fair opportunity for all young people. And you may have seen our recent research report on access to the creative industries, which came out a few weeks ago. We're discussing that today. Of course, before we jump in, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our partners at Citi, who made the research possible through their support for the trust. Now, look, the report highlights a pretty bleak picture, I'm afraid. Creative industries remain really difficult for those from working class backgrounds to break into. When you look at young people across the sector, we know there's around 4 times as many from middle class backgrounds as working class backgrounds, and it's worse at the top of the sector. So, for example, BAFTA nominees are 5 times more likely to come from a private school background. So we're going to get into all of that and more today. We've got an excellent panel of speakers with us to share their reactions and insights. Let me introduce the panel. So first we have Professor Dave O'Brien. Dave is a Professor of Cultural and Creative Industries at Manchester University, a globally recognized expert in the field. And Dave is also one of the authors of the research. Next, we have Polly Mackenzie. Polly is Chief Social Purpose Officer at University of the Arts London, which works to shape thriving and sustainable creative industries. Next, we have Pete Johnson. Pete is CEO of the British Screen Forum, which is the member organisation to the screen industries. And I should say we've been working with Pete also on a collaboration with the BSF on socio-economic diversity in screen. And then look, last but not least, we have Kaylee Curtis. Kaylee is a freelance production coordinator and also an alumni of the Sutton Trust and member of our Alumni Leadership Board. So that is our fantastic panel for the day. Dave, I'm going to come to you first. Perhaps you could just pull out some of the main findings from the report and also just share your reactions.
Sure thing. I'll just give you a couple of selected highlights. The report is what I'd euphemistically call detailed and in-depth, but that does mean it's long. So, there's kind of a whole range of things that you can dive into and get from the report. But I think there's a couple of kind of headline takeaways that will kick off the discussion today. So in the report, working with Erica and Rebecca at Sutton Trust, which was brilliant, myself, Orion Brooke and Mark Taylor collaborated on really kind of restating with new research some of the challenges of who gets to be, I suppose, the most kind of high profile cultural and creative workers. So in the report, Erica teased out the fact that over 2 in 5, over 40% of classical musicians attended independent schools, the kind of dominance of fee-paying schools for that route, which is far and above the overall population. Similarly, BAFTA nominations, again, dominated by those from independent fee-paying schools, which I think is sadly something that we keep coming back to, both because of the Sutton Trust's kind of excellent work in this space with the leading people kind of framework that they've got, but also because I think contemporary public and media discussions have really started to focus on both the inequalities of representation in these most senior or prestigious positions, but then I guess kind of further down the pipeline or further down the system with questions of how do people get in, who gets in. In the report, we talk a lot and in great detail about universities. This is for several reasons, partially because universities are important in shaping elite figures, particularly things like specialist creative institutions. You can see there over half of classical musicians have gone to these types of universities, just under a third of the actors in the Sutton Trust's analysis. Pop music, interestingly, is much more seemingly kind of egalitarian in terms of university attended, although there are challenges around class and school type for popular musicians. And the importance of university is really not just at the elite end. We show in the report how um, key creative occupations, whether the more, I guess, kind of applied, so things like architects, right the way through to artists, musicians, have really high levels of individuals who've got creative undergraduate degrees. Something myself and some colleagues have kind of flagged in other parts of the research field on these issues is, it's not that you need a degree. There are no formal qualifications to be an artist, to be a musician, to be a graphic designer, but actually you're highly unlikely to be able to do this creative occupation without this higher education experience. And seemingly at, I guess, a kind of a headline level, HE is kind of doing okay. If we look at creative subjects and how they compare to all other university subjects, we can see that they look pretty similar in terms of social class origins. So those from upper middle class origins are about a quarter of all students studying all subjects. Those from creative subjects are actually slightly lower than that. They're at sort of between 23 and 24%. Similarly, our working class origin students, which is the darker blue block, seem to be coming in to university at similar rates to the rest of the student population. And in some ways, I really wish I could kind of stop there and just say, well, there are, kind of no problems. But actually, as we dig in, we can see that these overall figures hide considerable differences, particularly at specific institutions. The same story comes up for school type, where creative subjects seem to be doing a bit better in terms of their proportion of state students, although there are nuances when we look at school type because of the higher proportions of those who either don't declare or more likely are from international schooling contexts. So when we start to dig down, I won't dwell too long on this. We've got a very detailed explanation in the report. What we can see is that there are really significant differences by course type and by institution type. And when you put these things together, institution type and course type together, what you can see is that things like music at the Russell Group have really vastly higher proportions of those from these most kind of elite upper middle class social starting points. Specialist institutions also have these challenges, I guess, in terms of very low numbers of working class origin students. The Russell Group as a whole doesn't do that well in terms of its working class origin student representation. But again, picking out things like music, drama, and art, even in the context where the Russell Group doesn't do all that well for working class representation, these subjects specifically are doing worse. Interestingly, post 92s, where we'd kind of hope the sort of heavy lifting was going to be done, we see higher proportions of those from that kind of top end, that upper middle class social starting point in creative subjects as compared to all students at post 92s as a whole. So in terms of our social class origins, we've got really significant challenges at the kind of specialist institutions that are driving entry to specific elite cultural occupations. We've got challenges at the kinds of institutions that are considered the most kind of prestigious, so the Russell Group, and we've got challenges even in those places that do best at widening participation and have that kind of broader art school tradition, so that the post 92 institutions. And school type, I won't dwell too much on this, but again, we're seeing kind of similar stories where things like music and drama at the Russell Group have, really kind of significantly higher proportions of those from private schools as compared with both the Russell Group as a whole and then our kind of average for the student body more generally. So what should we do about this? One of the things that we do in the report is we try and drill down specifically into music, art, and drama, and we try and place individual institutions in context as well. And this gives us the basis for thinking about possible policy interventions. And I'll just highlight a few of them that are in the report. The first thing I think is government really needs a major rethink of the higher education system, and it needs a major rethink of widening participation within that higher education system. I think, thankfully, we've seen a shift in rhetoric following the summer elections, and a lot of the, I think, most problematic noises coming from the government have stopped, and there's been a change of tone. However, a lot of the kind of most effective interventions around widening participation, access to higher education institutions, I think are really struggling in the context of the, frankly, disaster of higher education finances as a result of the current funding model and the real, I suppose, lack of accountability mechanisms around widening participation. Obviously, we can move away from HE and think about what's going on before higher education. So things like access to culture in schools, the importance of school trips and arts premium to actually pay for things like music lessons. And then we've got questions about, well, what happens when people enter the labour market? In particular, their likely, almost certain experience of unpaid labour, unpaid work, and the importance of really kind of stamping down on unpaid internships, which still in certain parts of the creative sectors are considered a fact of life. The other thing, though, universities, I think, do need to change how they do widening participation and how they think about supporting students. Most crucially, actually, this isn't just around money, although money really, really matters for how students get in and get on in university, but thinking about what goes on in creative degree programs and how, I suppose, the kind of course content of creative degree programs is best preparing people for an experience of a highly competitive creative labour market, and then more broadly, the graduate labour market generally. And employers, I do think need to think differently, particularly in a context where report after report, we don't cover it in this report, but, there's almost kind of every week new findings around poor conditions and low pay, whether that's high profile scandals at, I don't know, major broadcasters that we might be observing, right the way through to data showing how little artists, authors, theatre makers are being paid. And this, although for many parts of the sector, there is this question about government funding, about the kind of decline of support for arts and culture, actually there is still, huge amounts of money floating around parts of the creative sector that is clearly not making its way to either the workers nor to make sure that jobs are as kind of open and accessible to anyone with talent. And I will stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. Loads of stats and recommendations, which I'm sure we'll come back to as we get into the discussion. So thanks for that. Polly, perhaps we could come to you next just to share your sort of reactions to the report and insights from your perspective.
Thanks so much, Nick, and thanks, Dave. It's a really amazing report. Thank you so much for doing it. I think I just sort of want to share my reflections on why it matters, really, and why I really enjoyed this way of thinking about how all of this is connected, right? And the hardest problems to solve are the ones that are all connected to each other. But actually, that's why we're so stuck with this reality in our creative industries. So the first thing I just really value is that recognition that the creative industries, which are up there in the sort of career end of people's lives, you can't fix that problem without moving all the way down people's life journeys, right the way into schools. And it's very easy, I think, for civil society to say that. It's much harder for organizations that occupy one piece of that journey to accept that therefore they have responsibilities to look before and after themselves. But for me, being thinking about social purpose, the social purpose of a university is that, our product is not the courses that we market and try and get people to come and do. The product of a university is the graduates who are able to go out there and work. And so the kind of people who are able to and willing to come to our university, make it through that educational experience and then go out there, the only way for that to be the right kind of product, the diverse, creative, inspiring, across both protected characteristics and class, that, again, not just the creative industries need, but actually society as a whole needs, right? Because that's the other thing, is that the creative industries, they're not like the other industries. They help to shape the story of the nation and the story of our society. And when people talk about climate change, I'm sure some of you will know about Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. People also talk about Scope X emissions, which is the emissions you might create or get rid of because of your influence, because you were David Attenborough and you created Blue Planet and you actually changed people's minds in their millions about single-use plastic, right? So that sense that the creative industries, the stories that are told, shape all of our lives. And therefore, it's even more important, I think, for a cohesive nation that you have diverse creative industries than it is that we have diverse science industries. And we should also fix those. But I work at University of the Arts London, and we think of ourselves as an anchor institution for the creative sectors because we're a specialist. And I'm going to push on that phrase I've just used, anchor institution, because that's been developed as a way of thinking about kind of local economies, particularly for universities. For us, because we're a specialist, I think we have to think about it differently, but it's the same mindset of really being expansive about your responsibilities. You can't just say, well, we're looking for the world's best fashion designers, and we just have to take the ones with the greatest portfolio at 18. You have to then also think about, why is it that the kind of portfolios we're seeing are not coming from students who haven't got the money to put them together, who haven't got the creative experiences in their schools? And then how can we, as a big organization in this sector, act with that responsibility? So we are doing work individually for students that starts at 14 through our Insights program to draw diverse groups of students to be able to access higher education. We're also an awarding body working with basically every further education college to have access to further education creative sectors. We're thinking about after, but we're also thinking about the role we can play in things that we can't control. How can we support the development of the curriculum or the political understanding of the value of creativity much more broadly? And just as a final thought on that, I think that in and of itself, that political case for creative careers and creative industries is also really important for persuading kids, particularly kids from minoritized or poor backgrounds, to take the risk of studying a creative subject. Because, my mum actually was talked out of, banned basically from going to art school, which is what she wanted, by her mum, who said she had to be a doctor because they didn't have any money and it's safer to be a doctor. And we know from loads of research we've done, and it's there in huge amounts of Sutton Trust work as well, is that if you don't feel confident there's a job at the end of it, you don't take the risk. You certainly don't take the risk of borrowing the money to study in London. So it becomes there's a doom loop here, but we can get rid of the doom loop, because if you diversify the creative industries and give kids and their parents confidence that there'll be a place for them, that's actually how you can kind of create a virtuous circle of progress.
Brilliant. No, thank you. There's certainly that sort of doctor or lawyer as the safe choice is something we hear a lot in our work as well. And I'm sure this interconnectedness will come back to that in the discussion, I'm sure, because that's absolutely part of what's going on in creative, of course. Pete, perhaps we can come to you next. I'd love to get your reaction to the report, and also, what do you think your members' reaction to the report will have been?
Yeah, thanks very much, Nick, and grateful to be here. Obviously, I run an organisation formed of members who are all senior people from across film, TV, video games, and social videos. This is very much a sort of industry take rather than an educational one. Great to see the report. It adds to the sort of body of knowledge we've got in this area. And it confirms what we've known for some time, which is that our sector has a problem. It has a problem at entry level, and it has a problem in terms of retention and progression. And we see the inequalities are particularly acute, as Dave laid out, in the creative and senior roles in particular. And I think there's been no lack of effort at a company and sort of subsector level over many years around EDI. But I think we've got around 200 schemes in the creative industries, around 120 in screen alone. But despite all that effort, the nut is very much not cracked. And sometimes it seems as though we're pouring more and more water into a bucket with a very large hole. And that's partly because, as Polly said, everything's connected and it's not a simple matter to resolve. I think part of that's about the nature of the sector. It's very fragmented, with lots of the hiring done through small contractors. It's very project-based, which means it has a large freelance workforce, either on short-term PAYE contracts or self-employed. And it has lots of informal hiring practices because timelines are often very short. Now, that's true of our sector. That's also true of some other sectors. I think probably construction could claim all of those factors as well. Some of the things that are unique about screen sectors and the creative industries are that our sector seems to be particularly attractive to those from more privileged backgrounds. So people are clamoring to get in, so those roles are taken. And that's especially true in relation to more senior and creative roles. It's also true that the routes into our sector are significantly more complex and significantly less clear than for most other sectors. I don't think there are many careers officers who would know what to say to a child who said, I want to be a set designer. What do you do? What GCSEs do you do? And that means that too often it's about who you know rather than whether, and about whether you can self-finance, particularly in the early stages of your career when you're having to keep a roof over your head between projects. But I think just because it's difficult is not an excuse for failing to improve. And I think we need to think about how we can move the dial. I think firstly, I think the sector itself has got to recognise the intersectionality that's at play. An awful lot of the initiatives have focused on gender, ethnicity, disability. Very few have focused on socio-economic. And I think that does need to change, because if we don't fix socio-economic, I think we're going to struggle on some of those other characteristics as well. Secondly, and I think this is really important, we've got to be much more strategic in our approach as a sector. Currently, there's lots of individual schemes operated by individual companies or small groups of companies, but there's a lack of measurement, there's a lack of evaluation, and there's a lack of coordination. Lots of small schemes focused on outreach and access, but much less on retention and progression. The bucket, as I said earlier, has got a great big hole in it. That's why we've teamed up with Sutton Trust and with Screen Skills to develop a proposal that we hope will bring screen sector companies together to address the issue systemically, learning from the model that Sutton Trust have successfully used in other sectors. And I hope we'll be announcing more about that over the coming weeks, I'll say. Nick, you can correct me. I think thirdly, we need to recognise that some of the levers that have been pulled in other sectors won't necessarily have the same effect in ours. Placing obligations on larger companies, for example, won't necessarily affect the vast amount of hiring decisions that are taking place in small independent production companies, often with really quite small numbers of employees. We also need to think about how we might better support creative freelancers, particularly in the early stages of their career. And that's why we've teamed up with other screen sector organisations like Beck2, Equity, Directors UK, Production Guild, the Film and TV Charity, and the BFI to commission research looking at how competitor territories do this better and evaluating what the impact of those policies would be if implemented in the UK. We lose too many people in the first few years because they can't afford to pay the rent month on month. Finally, absolutely we need to address the inequities in access to relevant educational opportunities, but we also need to stop using qualifications as a proxy for the skills and attributes that are actually necessary for the role. I thought it was particularly striking in the report that it revealed that Not having a degree is much less of a barrier for white middle-class males in London than it is for other demographics. So if I don't need a degree, why does somebody else? That's not to downplay the importance of education, but the educational offering does need to be more closely aligned with the needs of the sector if it's to be an effective means of addressing the current inequalities. We need a better understanding of the range of roles in the sector, clearer signposting of routes in, regular reviews of curricula with meaningful industry involvement, and more generally, creative skills need to be embedded across the curriculum and aligned with digital and entrepreneurial skills. That will make people much more attractive to the sector. It would not just a great focus on creative skills would not just equip young people better for our sector, but as countless studies, including from the World Health Organization, have pointed out, they would also make people better employees for the whole sector because they foster the skills that encourage innovation, and that's meaning.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Pete, and absolutely looking forward to taking that collaboration forward with yourselves and the Screen Skills team in the next few weeks. Kaylee, perhaps we could come to you now, and maybe you could just share a bit about your experience of building your career in the sector, as well as your reaction to the report.
Yeah, and thanks a million, Nick, for inviting me to come along today. It's such a super panel. Just to sort of build on what Pete has been saying, so I have been working in the industry now for a few years. I've worked across 20 non-scripted, so factual shows. I've done them across 4 broadcasters and in 2 different languages. So I have a variety of experiences, but unfortunately, there's some things are continuous and you hit the same roadblocks no matter what companies, no matter what programs you're in. The first thing is obviously getting into the industry. As has been said, unpaid internships are just expected. No matter what entry-level position you go to, you're expected to already have something under your belt. Whether that is you've already have a portfolio ready, but how can you have a portfolio if you don't have a camera, if you don't have sound equipment, if you've never had a chance to work at a company before? You're expected to come with a range of skills, a range of contacts. You're meant to share your own social capital from your first day. You'd have to share your friends, your family, what resources I have at home. Everything is open. It's not just coming into an office, it's coming in and giving your whole life across to someone. There's also a different lingo that I personally, from my background, never knew about coming into. I didn't realize that if someone asks you to go for a coffee, there's no coffee bought. That's them interviewing you for a position. And the first time I got asked to go for a coffee, I came with my reusable coffee cup and they looked at me like I was strange and proceeded to ask me what A levels I had and what I did outside work. It's just a different world that unless you have the connections, you have someone there to prep you for that, you simply don't know. As Pete said, it can be a very informal industry. Most jobs I have seen have been advertised through a WhatsApp group chat or on Facebook groups. And most of those jobs are only up for about 3 to 4 days at a push, absolute maximum. And most of them are recruiting this week to start next week. So how can I, as someone from a low-income background, without mummy and daddy to support me, be able to happily end one contract, wait for a Facebook post to go up about a job which may be in London, Manchester, Scotland, be happy to then relocate there and to start there for 4 weeks and then to sit with nothing to do then after that? It just doesn't seem to add up for someone who is trying to break into the industry, but yet there's always barriers and barriers. And if you're not willing to take that risk, then you're not willing to develop your career and you're not going to get that experience that every employer is asking for. But the biggest barrier, as someone from a lower income background that I've come across, is having the self-confidence and the self-assurance to put myself out there. Within the TV industry, Bec2 sets like minimum rates that you really should be asking for each role. And whenever I go to my roles, I said, this is the industry standard rates. And then you're told that you're not good enough for that. You're not, even though my role is this and my expectation is this, you're not to get that because no one actually pays those rates. And you have to stand up for yourself. You're constantly negotiating because if you're doing 8-week contracts here and there, you're negotiating every 2 or 3 months how much you're worth. And every 2 to 3 months, you're being told that you're not good enough and you're not enough. And to have the self-confidence coming from a lower income background where you know the odds are against you to stand up for yourself is something that I find from my background I don't have, whereas my more affluent peers have it in bucket loads and have been told from day one that they are enough. And within that as well, because you are self-employed, you don't have a manager, you don't have someone who helps you develop, you have to develop you. So whenever it comes to promotions, you promote yourself, which is a very strange position to be in. I, at the minute, am becoming a junior production manager, but no one has told me, oh, you should be a junior production manager. I've told me, because I've done 20 shows, because I've had all this life experience, that I'm worth it. But I still need someone to take a gamble on me. That even though I have all of this experience and I can show them the shows I've made, I need someone to say, actually, yeah, I do think you're ready. Whereas if I was in a traditional workplace where I have a line manager, I have a normal like development meeting every week, someone would naturally promote you. Those conversations would happen. So yes, there is the barriers that are in place. There's the logistics of how to get into the industry. Like there's no other work I've ever come across that the standard line is, how did you get your job? Oh, I fell into it. I've never met an accountant who said, how did you get into actuary? Oh, I fell into it. Whereas that is just standard. So to have to go from that so informal to believing in yourself that, yes, I believe I can get another job after the next 6 weeks ends. I do believe that I am worth the money that the industry tells me I should be getting paid. And yes, I do believe that I'm ready to step up, to promote myself, to take these extra trainings, to take this risk. So there's so much going on that, yes, it isn't just an industry thing. It's not just the systems. There's so many different powers at play because there are so many networks, so many different schemes going on, so many different people, and the power is so concentrated and everyone knows everyone that it is, as Polly was saying, it is a big problem. It can't be solved by one body, one board, one broadcaster.
So, thank you, Kelly. Very good to hear that from the front line, if you like. And I think many of the folks on the panel will have heard about those barriers, as they've been through the research as well. Okay, I think we're going to move to questions and audience questions now. And if I could ask folks on the audience to put your questions in the chat, and also if you could just put your name and organisation perhaps alongside the question. So as we let me ask one as we wait for some of those to come through, which is I think is probably to Polly or Dave. But I just wanted one thing we haven't talked about perhaps yet is the narrowing of the curriculum in schools, which feeds into this whole creative industry discussion. And so yeah, I don't know, Polly or Dave, perhaps do you want to comment on that?
I mean, I can start. I'm sure Dave will have things to say.
Yeah, go on, Polly. Yeah.
So the creation of the EBAC, this sort of incentivization for schools to focus on non-creative subjects, did exactly what it was supposed to do, right? Which is to push schools into improving their scores and reputation with the government by focusing. And I have a lot of sympathy for schools because it's a sort of lazy policymaker solution, right? It's always to say, let's put this in the curriculum. And the schools are like, I can't put everything in the curriculum. But I think it's really important to have a range of options. What I'm particularly worried about, and we're thinking at UAL about how we can get involved, is that when I was in government, we introduced free school meals for younger kids. And we thought that would be easy. You just pay the revenue costs of the food and the dinner ladies, right? And then, of course, what fools? Actually, huge capital need emerged from the system because since the numbers of kids eating a hot meal at school had reduced so much, there were not the right dinner halls, not the right kitchen facilities. We had to put in a whole bunch of stuff. I think that the same is true around creative subjects.
Yeah.
We're trying to do some research on it at the moment, but is it actually things like DT, equipment, theatres, musical instruments, lots of those spaces will have been recommissioned, closed down, sold off, whatever they might be, because of the deprioritization of creativity. So there's this big curriculum review from government and they're making all the right noises, aren't they? And like for Keir Starmer to say how important it was that he learnt the violin, right? Like that's not like saying I love football. People say that to be popular. I mean, I think he does love football.
No, it's
But you don't say that you loved learning the violin to be like popular with the man. Like you say it because it's true. So I just think the practicalities of that are going to prove a lot more difficult.
Yeah. No, thank you. And it's some of the unintended consequences of that, isn't it, as well, on the whole curriculum stuff. But I've got loads of questions coming through on the chat now. So let's perhaps go to some of those. I'm going to start with a really practical one, which I think we're going to go to Kaylee first, and then anybody else who wants to jump in after that. So, as a working class, lower middle class writer applying for schemes at local theatres and funding, I've been told my applications were good, but they're looking for a better mix of people. Practically speaking, what advice do the panelists have on how to bring up class in applications and interviews in the right sort of way? Yeah.
I think that's a great question, because
Yeah.
sometimes you feel like if you raise the flag about your background, that you're either complaining or that you're not like the person reviewing
Yeah.
your application.
Yeah.
From my experience, because like Nick said, I was the co-chair of the Alumni Leadership Board for the Trust for a year, and that was a great way to be able to tell my story but have the backing of something I was involved with. So I was able to say to people, I think you should implement this employment practice. I'm a part of the Sutton Trust, and this is what the Sutton Trust has done. I've often found it very useful to be able to either cite different organizations, different stats, whether it be this report saying, well, I don't think that, I feel like I have enough of a say. Here are some stats behind me. This is why I think the industry is going this way. So that's not just me saying that. Again, this could be me with my self-confidence, feeling like from my background, maybe I shouldn't be in these spaces. But I feel like if you have an organization, a stats report, something behind you, it gives what you're saying weight. And it's not just you saying it, it is a bigger body, it is academics, it is someone else saying it on your behalf and backing you up as well.
Yeah. No, thank you. Anybody else want to jump in on that one quickly? Any other advice?
I mean,
Dave,
just quickly, I think the context is changing, particularly as a result of not just this kind of research, but media discussions around class and underrepresentation. And I think, certainly pre-pandemic, 10 years ago, there would have been that real kind of worry that discussions of class were only framed through some, pretty classist idea of chippiness or, envy or, these fairly kind of Tory slogans. But I think now a lot of commissioning is much more interested in what stories haven't we told, and, are we doing enough in terms of representation? So I think, as Kaylee was saying, flagging what makes you kind of unique and different, I think is potentially quite powerful. Although, you will still encounter barriers where people are like, class isn't a thing, or actually we've told one working class story this year, so that's our quota or whatever. These attitudes are still there, but I think there is at least a kind of rhetorical shift going on.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's the good advice, I think, there. And just to say, sorry, I said earlier to put questions in the chat. It wasn't quite correct. There's actually a separate Q&A section for questions. So just apologies if I confused anybody with that. So it's the Q&A section, not the Zoom chat function. I'm going to go next to a question, which I think, Pete, is probably for you first, which is someone saying, yes, Kaylee, absolutely, unpaid internships completely rife in TV. I know the Sutton Trust has been campaigning to ban them. We absolutely have, and we're going to continue with that. But would banning them have any downsides for the industry, or what downsides do you see, or what are people concerned about?
I'm sure some employers would say, well, yes, it will increase our costs, and we do this because the amount of the commissioning budgets that we get from broadcasters never are not sufficient to make the programme, and we've got to rely on funding a bit of it ourselves on the back of other rights that aren't taken by the broadcaster, and blah 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 blah. But I think most of our members have been moving away from unpaid internships for some time, and I don't think many would be up for sort of defending the practice on a public platform, to be honest. And just on the point previously about whether how to bring up socio-economic background when applying for jobs, I would echo Dave's view there, that I think there is an increasing recognition in the industry that the lack of socio-economic diversity is a weakness. It's a weakness at the sector level, and it's a weakness at the individual company level as well. And our customers are the people of the United Kingdom and the world. And we need to understand their stories and tell their stories. So I was saying that if you've got a person in the back of a cab, the story of the cab driver is going to be more interesting than the story of the person in the back of the cab. And I think there's an increasing recognition that there's been a rather narrow focus on a particular type of story. So I think it's becoming more of a positive. We see more of a positive than as being chippy or reverse entitled.
Yeah. No, thank you. So watch this space on banning unpaid internships, I think. There's a long question here, which I'm going to paraphrase, and I'm going to come to Dave first and then Holly, I think, which is, I think to paraphrase it, it's kind of asking, is the priority area for change the industry rather than the universities? Just trying to unpick the interconnectedness a bit. And I think the questioner is positing the hypothesis that it's industry which is the most urgent need for change, not the university intake. So I'd be interested in reactions on that.
So shamefully, I'm going to plug a slightly different report on this.
Oh, excellent! Go ahead.
With the APPG for Creative Diversity, last year we published this report called "Making the Creative Majority," where we tried to show the quite dense intersections between higher education and industry. And yeah, I mean, Mariana, you're right. This is a major problem in terms of industry. I think is very comfortable with the idea of we're not getting the right kind of graduates. Graduates don't have the skills we want. You're kind of giving us people who are trained in theory, not in practice. And so some responses to skills kind of survey data backs up this industry position. At the same time, the creative industries are one of the lowest or kind of worst performing in terms of training their staff, supporting staff career development, investing long term in not just kind of practical skills, but actually things like leadership and management training. So it's clear that industry has a bit more to do. I think one thing that might be useful, though, to kind of put the focus back on universities is universities, much like industry, are incredibly comfortable saying it's not really our problem. It's to do with either the education system where we're drawing graduates from, or there is something about creative subjects that needs to be preserved from the terribly gauche and awful discussions of money and how do you find an accountant, how do you do a tax return, what should your day rate be and stuff like this. And I think increasingly we do need to shift, as some institutions are doing, discussions of employability and transferable skills into creative subjects themselves, because ultimately, and this is my kind of final point, this is an inequality issue. People who have got access to friends, family, who know either people in the industry, as Kaylee was saying, who can tell them the taxman is going to take a third of what you just earned, don't spend it, right the way through to this is how you pitch for something, this is what a day rate should be. These are better resourced, better connected, and ultimately it's an inequality issue as much as it is an employability issue.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dave. Polly, do you want to add any?
Well, Dave's right.
Yeah.
Of course, from a government perspective, higher education institutions are regulated, and creative industries are barely. And so there's a question of what can you actually affect if you are trying to secure policy change. But one of the things that's recommended in that report that Dave was just talking about, the APPG one, is thinking about creative apprenticeships. One of the reasons that creative apprenticeships don't really work, except with the few large employers like the BBC or whatever, is because early career precarity, right? Like you have to take on an apprentice for 2 years and guarantee that they'll have work in a sort of relatively regular way and contract with a training provider. And employers just don't want to do that. So you can either we can just shout at them, or I don't know. In construction, the apprenticeships has partly been driven through social responsibility and position from the big contractors. So, the BBC or Channel 4 could probably have an impact on their supply chain if they're not flush with cash. But actually, it's worth thinking about structures and design. So actually, for apprenticeships, we need to reconstruct apprenticeships to actually make them work for this sector, rather than just standing and going, oh yeah, these sectors are really rubbish. But and everything that Dave said is correct. But we also then, I have been involved in politics in one way or another for 20 years and been talking about banning unpaid internships literally all of that time.
No, it hasn't happened yet, has it? Yeah.
No, well, except that it has, because it's illegal to employ somebody without paying them because of the minimum wage. But you can't stop people from volunteering. So what you've got is smush. And it's very hard from a regulatory perspective to deal with smush.
Yeah. No, thank you, Polly. And I'm going to stay on the line because I'm just going to stick the next question. I'm just going to stick with you, then go Pete back to you in a sec, this is a great question. So should we be encouraged by the Secretary of State highlighting inequalities of access to the arts, including arts careers? What signals are we getting from government and the department on what might change there?
I think we're getting all the right signals.
Yeah.
But saying something is not the same as delivering it. You remember David Cameron promised to build a big society. Yeah. I can't find it. So it's a brilliant start. It's everything you might hope that they would say. Now comes the hard part. But again, there are lots of reviews out there, whether it's on curriculum or arts council. Yeah. All of us need to take responsibility for not sitting inside that box going, well, I'm only responsible for the things I can control. That's not true. We are responsible for the things we can influence as well. So how do we connect? How do we influence? How do we whinge about this stuff until it changes? Yeah.
Thanks. Pete, any thoughts from you on the government and the interaction with the industry?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I agree with Polly that we're getting all the right noises, and we were getting them throughout the last couple of years of the Labour in opposition, and they've continued into the first few months of this government. I think we're reasonably confident that there will be significant changes to the apprenticeship levy. That's something that that has basically been a payroll tax on the sector, because so few can actually make use of it because they can't make the placements for 12 months. And there's been various industry pilots to try and work out alternative ways of making the existing legislation work, but it just doesn't work, and it's not going to work for our sector. It needs to change. There needs to be much more flexibility, and then there's tens of millions of pounds that can be spent on training in the sector. I think we used to have a much better training provision back in the days when most of the the PSBs in particular did most of their production in-house. Above a certain age, everyone who works in industry worked at the BBC at some point. That's not a coincidence. That's less true now because PSBs have quotas for commissioning production from independent producers, and that's had enormously positive effects on health of the sector and all the rest of it. But it does mean that large organisations can tend to do more in terms of training and professional development than very small organisations can do. So there has been a negative effect there. I think let's see how much of this, how much of the good words play through into the right action in a very tight financially constrained environment. We are still hopeful, partly because the government seems to recognise, as to be fair, the last government did, that the creative industries are very important economically as well as socially and culturally, and to the democratic health of the nation. So I think we're quite well placed, but we need to be working together much more effectively, the sector. And I think that's my criticism of the sector, is it's not that great at coming together and working these things through as a sector. I remember talking to one of the business ministers in the last sector. She said, we get a million different voices saying slightly different things, where the other sectors come together and have one voice. That's much more powerful, and we need to get better at speaking with one voice on the big issues to make sure government actually delivers the key things that we all
No, makes sense. And so I guess it's encouraging noises, but watch this space on the government seems to be the summary there. I've got a great question for Kaylee, but I'm also going to come to each of the panel in rapid fire mode on this one in a second as well. So, but for you first, Kaylee, what is the top measure change you'd like to see implemented to improve access to creative industries?
Definitely around recruitment and definitely around transparent recruitment, because at the minute it is all about networks. Like I said, it's about Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups. It's all about who you know. And then that means that it's the same people in the same pond, just swimming around and round in circles. There's no one new able to get in. It's the same crews making the same shows, but with different titles. And that is within TV. I also run a not-for-profit music school. So I have 350 students come to me every week for that, and I have 32 tutors. So I know music-wise as well, it's even more impossible to break into unless you're in that circle. That's why I've heard a lot of people who come to our music school who go on to pursue music as a career, that they go to conservatoires is just to get the connections. Their skill they're happy enough with, but they just go for the people who are in their class, the alumni of their school, and for their tutors to get those connections, to get those gigs, because there is no single place to go to get recruited. And if you can't get your first gig and you can't get that experience behind you, you cannot get a second. So I think we need to have some way of the industry in terms of TV, but the industry in terms of the arts in general, to come together to work out some way that works for industries and companies, because I appreciate things are last minute. I appreciate short-term contracts need to happen, and I enjoy having short-term contracts and being able to move about. But I don't enjoy whenever I know my contract's ending next week and having to scroll on Facebook to find something new. There has to be some sort of scheduling, some sort of way of knowing what's coming up, for some sort of predictability for people's lives, and predictability for people who are either studying at university or want to leave school to pursue it, to know what their first step is. And their first step can't be going to do photocopying for someone, trying to find out who mummy and daddy knows, or just trying to send out blank emails to production companies, because that's not a career, that's begging, and no one needs that for their career.
No, thank you. That's a good, I mean, it's a really great point. I mean, Pete, that's something for us to pick up as we think about the piece of work we're looking at in the industry, right? And so how could one create such a transparent mechanism for recruitment? I'm going to see lots of nodding from Dave. I'm going to go Dave next quickly for your rapid fire. One thing you would change.
I mean, just specifically on HE, I think linking universities' ability to get any kind of government funding to the meeting of widening participation targets would be transformative for the sector. I suspect Polly might be slightly horrified by that, but right across the university sector, there is a lot of nice rhetoric around access and participation, and then when you get into it, little or nothing has changed in 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, however long back you want to cast the net. And that would be a brutal but effective incentive for institutions.
Yeah. Look, that's a great point. I mean, it's not just creative, right? In the work we do across subjects at university, you're absolutely right. The gap in access, there are more people of all types going to university, but the gap in access between better off and least well off has hardly shifted in 20 years, has it? So no, absolutely. That's a one that's close to our heart at the Sutton Trust as well. Polly, do you want to come in with your rapid fire one thing to change?
Well, I'd change that too, but I'd also put more money into the university sector. Fundamentally, I more conditionality, but also more cash, right? Like, we lose £3,000 on every single domestic student that we teach. That's actually really stupid. If the decision is to allow international students, also foreign countries, to pay for our university education, well, that's a weird choice. So the sensible financial choice for every university is to stop taking any home students at all. That is a ludicrous position for us to be in.
Yes, that's a system that doesn't.
Let's make a decision about whether we want a university sector, fund it properly, and then make conditionality in terms of civic impact, in terms of widening participation, in terms of research impact. I'm up for that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Pete, one rapid fire from your side.
Well, I think the sector needs to change from trying to deal with this on a sort of company by company or small group of company by basis, and recognise that we're not going to make progress unless we come together and work at it as a whole sector, because it is a sector-wide problem that nobody can solve individually. And within that, I think there should be a greater focus on retention and progression. Until we get the decision makers around commissioning decisions and hiring decisions more inclusive in terms of socio-economic diversity, then I don't think those decisions are going to change.
Yeah, no, thank you. Right, we've got a great question here. I'm going to Holly, come back to you first on this one. You touched on it briefly at the start, but perhaps say a bit more. So the question is, would you say there's a need to make the case for how this change would help increase creativity and the quality of artistic outputs, rather than just being an issue about fairness and equality?
I think there absolutely is, and it seems clear that both participation in creative pursuits and experiencing the creative outputs of others, whether that be in sort of elite forms or just simply like, going to see your kids perform at school, all of that contributes to human well-being. And in the end, for me, everything ought to contribute to human well-being, and planetary well-being. And so I think quality is a tricky word for us to think about, because so often quality has meant compliance with a set of elite norms, but ability to meet the needs for creative experience of this extraordinarily diverse community that we have, absolutely.
Yeah.
And yes, I think people who already believe, this general rule about campaigning, people who already agree with you are tempted by a sort of justice framing. It's the right thing to do. And those people often get cross when you make an instrumental framing, which is because we'll make more money or because we'll have more impact. But you need both kinds of argument if you want to be heard.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you. Dave, do you want to add anything on that one?
Yeah, I think we see this a lot in I think some quite difficult research with decision makers who are sadly comfortable with the idea that there is a tension between excellence and inclusion, and we'll talk about not wanting to take the risk on people they haven't worked with before or demographic groups that are unrepresented. And I think really kind of blowing that up on a moral point, but also really kind of stressing a business case that the creative industries are hungry for new products for the existing audience and new audiences for their existing products. And the only way to find them is to be more diverse.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Thank you. And Pete, do you think your members recognize that need for artistic diversity?
Yeah, no, I think they do.
Yeah.
I would echo the point that we're not restricted to making one argument. I think we can definitely make the moral argument, but also make the economic argument. I think, if you look at viewing figures from country to country, it's clear that viewers want to see content that reflects their own lives. It's also clear that we're not doing that, perfectly. At the moment, I was at a meeting around socio-economic diversity recently, and somebody said you'd think it was impossible to fall in love while living in a tower block, because that story is never told. And I think we do need to do more of that. And I think we also always tell writers to write what they know. And if we want to have more of those stories, we need to get them written by people who know them. I think there used to be a lot more working class stories on television prime time when I was growing up in the 70s. And they've disappeared because we've become much narrower in the pool of talent that we're drawing on.
Yeah.
We will suffer over the long term economically if we don't fix that.
Yeah. But better to be in love in a tower block than lonely in a mansion, eh? Kelly, but perhaps just come to you for a last word on that, and then I'm going to have to close the session.
Yeah, just completely agree with what has been said, in that if you have the right staff and the right people working in the content, and you're working with the people who you're working with in terms of like if you're with crew who know the stories and know the lives of the contributors you're working with for a show, you make a far better show. I've worked in shows where you have execs who are your usual high heel wearing people who are making farming programs who've never seen a pair of wellies in their life, cannot relate to farmers, do not have any sort of interactions. There is a terrible editorial coming back to the edit, and then as soon as you put in a runner, a production secretary who can understand the lives of people, you get so much more from them, because all arts and all creative industries is a people industry. So you need the right people to tell the right stories in order to get the best from it, because you're making content for people at the end of the day.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Kelly. Look, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. We're pretty much out of time. So Look, thank you to everyone on the panel. That's been a great discussion, and thank you all for attending. So thank you again.